Well, welcome back to Comics Are Dope. I'm BJ Kicks, and as you can see, I'm a little nervous. We've got a really special guest in today. Now, if you don't know who today's guest is, you're probably just mistaken, because if you've watched cartoons in the last 30 years, I assure you, you've seen this man's work between Gargoyles, Young Justice, Spectacular Spider-Man, and a ton of series in between. You've seen his work on screen. You may have even read a few of his comics. But today, we are talking about the legendary Greg Weisman, and we're talking to him today. How you doing, Greg?
I'm good, thank you.
Good, good. Man, I'm so excited to have you on. So I was telling you this off screen, but you are partly responsible for getting me into comics. Now, not to date you, not to make you feel old, right? But
It's impossible not to make me feel old because I am old. I feel that without you, I feel old. So don't worry about it.
so most of my earliest memories are in daycare. I went to a daycare where we watched an inordinate amount of TV. Like now that I have kids, I'm like, we watched way too much TV when I was in daycare. But the staples of TV, this was like in my opinion, like the golden age of animation. And maybe it's just like golden age of superhero shows because we had Batman, the animated series. We were watching Power Rangers, X-Men, Spider-Man, and Gargoyles. I would watch Gargoyles. They'd come on in the mornings as well. And so all of these shows are just kind of a part of my life from as long as I can remember. And here you are sprinkling all in throughout my life because that's been 30 years. That's crazy.
Yes, it has. I mean, I've been in this business professionally since I was 19. So that's 40 years, 41 years for me. And and I was a fan before I became a pro. So you got to go back another 10 or so years before that. So, this whole pop culture thing, I'm pretty deep
Mm.
into it because again, I'm old. Um,
So, so yeah, we're here to talk about gargoyles because you, obviously being the creator of Gargoyles, um, is awesome, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But there's a brand new Gargoyle series on stands right now from Dynamite Entertainment. That's been going. Issue 11 just came out what last week.
mhm.
And so that's been going. We've got a new Gargoyle series coming out next month, starting. It's called Gargoyles Quest. And then in the middle of that, you did Gargoyles Dark Ages, prequel series. So we're talking about a lot of those things, but you got a lot of work coming up and a lot of things that people are really excited to talk about. So I guess I'll kind of take things up a little bit further back. We can talk about the beginning, right? For those who don't know, well, I guess they know who you are now, but what got you started? Why this career?
I am fundamentally a storyteller. I, you know, joke that, if I was born in the Middle Ages, I'd be that guy with a lute in tights going from town to town, telling stories that way. I think it's all good that I was born it when I was because no one wants to see tights. Trust me on that. And I don't know how to play the lute. Um, but one way or the other, I was going to be a storyteller, and I've wanted to be a writer um, since at least second grade. In terms of what appealed to me, I loved superheroes as a kid, Marvel Comics, DC Comics, anything with superheroes always really appealed to me. And So, when I was in college, I started writing for DC Comics. And I wrote a bunch of stuff that did not get published. I got paid for it, which was nice,
Mm,
but it also became frustrating because I was writing this stuff and things kept happening
mm,
where uh, the book I was writing for would get canceled just
mm,
before my stuff was going to appear, or I'd write a Black Canary miniseries, and then Mike Grell decided to write Longbow Hunters, and
uh,
my miniseries had uh, Green Arrow and Black Canary get engaged, and Mike didn't want them engaged, so
mm,
my miniseries got canceled, which is not an attack on Mike.
right.
Mike Grell was up here back then, and I was literally nobody.
Mm,
So I get it. I even got it back then, but it became frustrating. And then I graduated college and got a staff job at DC. Initially, my title there was editorial assistant, which was a sort of fancy title for Xerox boy.
mm,
Um, so my job was just to take art. I was constantly at the Xerox machine, Xeroxing art. I was putting that in envelopes, sending it by UPS. Because keep in mind, this is so long ago, there was no email, there was no internet, there was no way, the way we sent pages around were, first off, they were actual pages. It wasn't digital.
right.
It was physical product. And we would send them by DHL, or we would sell them by UPS, or we would send them by Federal Express. And part of my job was like the company DC had different locations, required different uh, mailing services. So
Mm,
if it was going to Mexico or South America, it had to be DHL. But if it was going within the United States, it had to be FedEx. If it was going to England, then it had to be something else. And that was the level of complication of my job. So it wasn't a hard job. There was just
mm,
a lot of stuff going through my office all the time. Also, I didn't really have an office. I just sort of had a cube that had a big Xerox machine in it, and barely room for a desk. But I worked my way up. I became a associate editor there eventually, and I began writing on the side again, particularly with Cary Bates, who was a longtime comic book writer. He and I became writing partners for a period
mm,
of time, and we worked together on a series called Captain Atom. We'd sort of met working on a series he had called, that was eventually called Silver Blade, that was set in Los Angeles. And the big appeal I had for Cary initially was that I was from Los Angeles. So,
mm,
and he was from Ohio and lived in New York and had been to Los Angeles once, but didn't really know it. So he was started off just picking my brain about geography.
right.
Um, and then, we'd talk story, and he kind of liked the way my brain worked, and we complemented each other well. We had sort of different, but complementary skill sets. And so when Captain Atom started up, we really started doing that as partners. But I also left staff at DC and came back to LA,
Mm,
and I went to graduate school, and then eventually got a job at Disney TV animation in 1989. I started at Disney TV animation. That was sort of, and at the time I was still writing Captain Atom on the side, but for at least the first year or so that I was at Disney, and but that's sort of how I got into it. Was started in comics and then worked my way up into television.
awesome. Now, the they say that if you're a writer, you can write anything, right? Screenplays, comics, short stories, television, animation, and I guess largely it's all storytelling. But you seem to have sort of found your home in animation. Why animation as opposed to live action?
My mother would like to know the answer to that question too, um, because there's a lot more money in live action than there is in animation. Um, I I think the short answer is not one of intent, but where I could find a job.
Mm,
But what I will say is that once I got into animation and learned about it, I mean, my first uh, television credit was on a show called Gem and the Holograms. Carrie and I co-wrote one freelance episode of Gem and the Holograms
mm,
before I started working at Disney. Um, but once I got into Disney, I had three really great mentors who helped me out a lot at learning uh, what animation is about,
mm,
how it's made from top to bottom.
mm,
Um, Tad Stones taught me all about developing shows. Gary Kreisel taught me about the business of animation, and Alan Zasloff taught me about the production of animation.
mm,
And they were just really great. And the one thing I'll say for myself is that I actively pursued these learning experiences. In other
mm,
words, I didn't just get the job and sit there and do the two or three things that I was asked to do. I took advantage of my opportunity at being at Disney to sort of really learn how the business worked top to bottom, how production worked top to bottom, how writing worked top to bottom. You said, if you're a writer, you can write anything. If you're a storyteller, you can do anything. And I think there's some truth to that. But every individual thing is still its own discipline.
mm.
And you have to learn the discipline that you're pursuing. So, yeah, if you're I'm just taking this as an example. If you're a screenwriter, you decide to write a novel, that's great. And you probably can do it, but you've got to learn how to, one way or another, you've got to teach yourself how to write a novel. It's
Right.
not like automatically being a screenwriter means, well, I can write a novel. That's easy.
Mm,
Likewise, I'd been a comic book writer, but learning to work in animation, there was a whole skill set I had to build up. I knew how to tell a story, but I didn't necessarily know when I started how to tell a story in an animated series.
mm,
And so I had to learn it. Having learned it, I truly did fall in love with the freedom that animation provides. We can create worlds. You can do that obviously today with CGI in a big live action movie. But back in the late 80s and early 90s, you couldn't,
mm.
and not at the level that we're doing it now. And by the way, to do that even now, obviously, you're talking about, movies that cost the GDP of a small country to
Right.
make. And in a cartoon, I'm not saying it's inexpensive, it's not.
Mm,
But relatively speaking, it's cheap and you can use your imagination. And I also believe that there a certain remove that an audience has with an animated film from a live action film. And
mm.
the irony is that it actually may let you. I think my headphones just died on me. Can
I
you
can
still
still
hear
hear
me?
you. I can still hear you.
Okay. Um, I I think the irony is that that people watching an animated series are actually open themselves up more
Hmm.
to learning, to experiencing, to character growth in ways that in live action it's like, oh, that doesn't look real, or
Mm.
that I'm supposed to buy that,
Right.
in animation you just kind of buy it, and
Yeah.
so it allows you to focus more on character, ironically.
Mm,
And so I'm passionate about animation. But having said that, I've tried, not recently, but over the years, I tried many times to break into live action and just never managed it.
mm,
I think it's less true now, but when I was coming up, the fact that I had done cartoons sort of put me in a box.
mm,
And a lot of the people hiring were like, oh, he's a cartoon writer. Uh, and they weren't too interested in me participating in a live action show
Mm,
because I'd been sort of typecast as a, oh, he writes kids stuff for cartoons. We don't, he's not someone we want here on our sophisticated live action show. And
mm.
I have no regrets from a creative standpoint. I'm really proud of my body of work, but from a standpoint of, career, from the standpoint of earning money, it would have been nice to make live action Writers Guild money as opposed to animation writers money, which is not covered by the guild and which gets no residuals and all that kind of stuff. Um, so it's a double-edged sword, but I'm very proud of the work I've done in animation.
I mean, you should be. I mean, I just jotted down a few things. If we're sitting here looking at your
Yeah, I
IMDb, we'll
gotta
be
take these
here.
out. They're not working anymore.
Oh, okay. Um, but yeah, so if we're if we're looking at your, television, filmography, right, we'd be here all night. But just noting a few things, right, from my childhood, we've got the Batman, we've got Young Justice, the Men in Black animated series, Spectacular Spider-Man, Star Wars Rebels. Like you've got a lot to be proud of in your career. So I appreciate that you don't regret it because I certainly enjoyed watching all of these things, even Buzz Lightyear, Star Command. I mean, we can go on and on. I won't, but it's awesome, man. But so during your time at Disney, of course, sort of I guess the hallmark would be uh, your creation of Gargoyles. But what sorts of things were you on prior to, kind of leading up to that?
So my original job at Disney was as a junior development executive, and
Mm,
I worked my way up to director of series development. And so initially, my job there was not talent. I was
mm,
on the executive side of the desk. And when I took the job at first, I was like, all right, this will be the day job, and then I'll go home at night and I'll write. And I did that for a while, particularly because like I said, I was still writing Captain Atom for DC Comics.
mm,
But between even after I stopped doing Captain Atom, I'd get home at night, I'd be tired.
yeah.
And so there's 5 years where I was an executive and I did a lot of writing as part of the job. I write pitches for this show or proposals for that show or something like
Mm,
that. But I didn't do any writing for me
mm,
for almost 5 years. Um, and then came Gargoyles, which I came up with the idea for with my team in 1991,
mm,
and which we finally sold 2 years later in '93. Um, and it was hard to sell it. Michael Eisner, who at the time was chairman of the Walt Disney Company, rejected it twice before he bought it the third time.
mm,
Um, and uh, and then we were up and running with this show that for Disney was something very, very different. We'd been doing a lot of real, and I love these shows, Gummy Bears and Tailspin and Chippendales Rescue Rangers and Darkwing Duck and
mm,
um, uh, DuckTales, all these great shows. But uh, this was something very, very different for that company at that time.
yeah.
And normally, what I would do is find a showrunner on the writing side, story editor or producer or showrunner on the writing side. And then there was another executive on the production side who would find a producer on to handle direction and design and all that sort of stuff. And we'd partner these two people up.
Mm,
Sometimes one of them was in charge and the other was under. Sometimes they'd be equal partners. Um, but we'd partner these two people up and we'd set them off,
mm,
make the show. And I would pay attention through the pilot to make sure they were making the show that we had sold.
right.
Um, but then I would walk away and start developing the next slate of shows,
Mm,
usually.
But one of the things that happened on Gargoyles, A, is that I created the show and I'd been working to sell it for 2 years. So I had really gotten deep into it. The second thing is that because this was a new kind of show for Disney, we had trouble finding the right people to work on it.
Mm.
But we also had deadlines. We had air dates we had to make. And so decisions had to be made that normally would be made by the producers, and we had no producers.
Yeah.
And so I became the guy making those decisions. And thus I became even more, fell even more in love with Gargoyles. And I loved it to begin with, but I just felt intrinsically attached to it. So eventually, we went through a number of writers before we found Michael Reeves, incredibly talented guy who we stole from Batman the Animated Series.
Mm.
And they finally found a producer on the design and direction side, Frank Parr, who we also stole from Batman the Animated Series. But by that time, I felt too attached to let it go as I normally would.
Right.
And so I went to my bosses and I said, hey, I want to move over and I want to produce the show with Frank.
Mm.
And their initial reaction was, you've never produced anything before. And I was like, that's true. But 5 years ago, I'd never been a development executive before. And that worked out all right. So why don't you give me a shot here? And so they did, kind of. They did, but they were like, okay, you can produce the show with Frank, but you have to also do your development job. So for 10 months, I held 2 full-time jobs and got paid for the lesser of the 2. And we produced 13 episodes on a 10-month sliding schedule. And everyone loved them, and it all turned out pretty great. And then they ordered 52 episodes for season 2. And I went to my bosses and I said, I cannot do this. I can't do 52 episodes in the same amount of time that I did 13 and hold down the development job. So I fully moved over, in essence, from one side of the table, the executive side, over to quote unquote the talent side, and became full-time co-showrunner with Frank on Gargoyles for the second season. And pretty much from that point on, that became my career, which was, I would develop shows, but as talent as opposed to an executive.
Gotcha.
I moved over from being an executive to being a writer, producer, etc.
Okay. So you mentioned Batman the Animated Series. It's funny, I've got Batman right over here as my action figure on top of my speaker. But the way the story is told is like, oh, Disney wanted to compete with Batman the Animated Series, right? But you conceived of the show before Batman premiered. What were your original inspirations for Gargoyles?
So we did conceive the show before Batman premiered, although to be fair, the original inspiration for Gargoyles was a TV show called Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears.
Okay.
And the original version that we pitched first to Eisner was a comedy adventure show, very much in the tone of Gummy Bears. Gummy Bears was a show created by a guy named Jim Magon that I just loved. I worked a little bit on the last couple seasons of it as an executive, just sort of supervising it, but I had no creative input in it. But I loved it.
Yeah.
And we felt like it was a great original show that Disney had made that got no respect. And we knew why. There was a lot of brand confusion between Gummy Bears and Care Bears.
Yes.
And Gummy Bears had this great backstory and this great medieval setting and all this fun stuff going on. And Care Bears, I'm going to offend some Care Bear fans listening to this podcast, but Care Bears was, to me, a sort of saccharine, sweet show where it's like I'll give you a hug and everything will be better, and but both of them featured small multicolored bears.
Hmm.
And ours, even though theirs was the saccharine show, in my opinion, ours was the show that was named after a candy.
Right.
So I understood why there was confusion. But Gargoyles was an attempt to do a show like Gummy Bears, not copy it, but do one in that genre.
Hmm.
That would garner more respect. So it was the 90s, and in the 90s, everything needed to be edgier.
Right.
Being edgy, that was a big thing. So we did two things very consciously to make the show edgier. Instead of doing cute little multicolored bears, we did cute little multicolored monsters,
Mm.
gargoyles. I'd been fascinated with gargoyles since I was a teenager.
Mm.
So this was a natural thing for me. It's like we can have fun little monsters running around doing these adventures instead of fun little teddy bears doing them.
Mm.
And then the second thing we did is we wanted to have this great medieval backstory, but we cast a spell on them and put them to sleep for 1,000 years and have them wake up in modern day Manhattan. That would be edgier too. It
Yeah.
would be modern day. It wouldn't be this soft focus medieval thing. No, it's happening right now. You have these creatures from the medieval world who are waking up in modern day Manhattan. Now, that's fundamentally the premise of Gargoyles, but the tone was very different.
Mm.
And we tried to sell that show to Eisner, and he just didn't buy it. Now, I think it would have been a great show, not the show that we all know and love, but it probably would have came and went.
Right.
So my boss still thought it was my immediate boss. I mean, Eisner was the big boss, right? But my immediate boss still thought there's something to this. So work on it some more. So I pitched the show to Tad Stones, who created Darkwing Duck shows. And Tad had, by that time, seen early footage for Beauty and the Beast. This is before Beauty and the Beast came out. But he had seen it already. And he said, why don't you, instead of having all these little gargoyles, you've got this human female character who helps them out. What if you had one big gargoyle instead of all the little ones and this human, and you could do a Beauty and the Beast kind of thing? And so an artist named Greg Weisman and I created Goliath, who did not exist in the old show, the old version of the show. And we took the whole comedy version of the show and put it through the prism of Goliath and came out the other end fundamentally with the show that aired. And then we had to pitch it. And so we came up with all these ideas. I mean, and again, this was way more up my alley. I was a superhero guy. I had worked at DC Comics for years. And so this was going to be a superhero show without all the, without capes and tights, right? But that was the genre we were now in, the sort of mutt superhero genre, which incorporates detective fiction and science fiction and magic and fantasy and horror and occult, and anything you can think of is all part of the superhero genre, right?
Right.
So that's what we were going to do. And we went nuts coming up with ideas for this show. We came up with this incredibly huge pitch for this show, which we pitched to Eisner, and he said no. And we walked away again, still feeling like this was a good show. And we had a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who at the time was chairman of the Walt Disney Studios. So Eisner was Katzenberg's boss, and then we were all under Katzenberg. And Jeffrey said in this sort of post-mortem meeting, so you're going to keep working on Gargoyles? And I actually was like, no, I don't think so, because I pitched it to Michael twice now, once as a comedy adventure show and one as an action drama. He said no to both. I don't know where else to take it. He's like, no, he didn't say no. He just wanted you to work on it some more. Well, I had been there the day before, and that was not the message that came from Michael. But what I was getting was that Jeffrey still thought there was something to it.
Mm.
And he wasn't going to disagree with Michael in a room, at least not back then. But he still wanted us to pursue it. So we went back to the drawing board for a third time, and we took a careful look at the show, and we said, no, there's nothing wrong with this show. This is a great effing show, right?
Mm.
The problem was the pitch. The pitch was so huge with all these ideas, the pack and the mutates and all this stuff, which we ultimately did put in the show.
Right.
But the pitch was distracting. You couldn't focus on anything. So we cut the pitch. We didn't add anything.
Right.
We just cut stuff out, and we focused the pitch on the relationship between Goliath, the lead gargoyle, and Elisa, the human cop, who became his friend. And by that time, Beauty and the Beast had come out.
Right.
And as you may know, was something of a hit for the Walt Disney Company.
Absolutely.
So when we went back a third time to Eisner, we really had a focused Beauty and the Beast, modern day style pitch with a gargoyle and a human. And yeah, we had a little bit on some of the other characters in there, the trio and Hudson and Bronx and Xanatos, although back then he was called Xavier, and Demona. But we really focused it on Goliath and Elisa, and Michael bought it like that. Then we were making the show. So at that point, the inspirations, we had moved away from the Gummy Bears inspiration. And I would say my second biggest inspiration for the show was a television series that aired in the 80s called Hill Street Blues, and which to me is the founder of all modern television. And I really used that as a model for a lot of what we were doing structurally. And then, we had all sorts of other influences, certainly Shakespeare, Arthurian legends, various mythologies from all around the world. We brought as much in as we could. And all of that became part of what Gargoyles is and continues to be now in the comics to this day. As we approach the 30th anniversary of Gargoyles this year.
Yeah, that checks out. Definitely 30 years ago. Wow, it's funny because as I'm just thinking back, right, the sort of melting pot of cartoons that I absorbed as a 3, 4, 5, 6 year old, Gargoyles was there, but when I was revisiting the series when the first comics came out last year, 2022 December, but as I'm revisiting, I didn't realize just how deeply layered the show was. Like there are a lot of themes, and I guess we kind of look back at a lot of animation and realize there's a lot of adult themes or mature themes, I should say. But I mean, there's this sort of enduring thread of, the hated and feared. I guess we can kind of draw like mutant comparisons. Even like in the current comics, right? There's a lot to say about like how do we define humanity, and at times it's a commentary on like the worst of like human instincts and the condition, right? Like the way we judge things or people that we don't know or aren't familiar with. But there was so much in that show that I did not absorb then. That's really cool to look back on now. How conscious of a decision is that? I guess everybody has to decide to put it to page, but how much of that are you thinking about when you're just trying to get a show made?
I'd actually say all of it. There were certain things I wanted to do that we weren't allowed to do back in the day objectively. A good example is the character of Lexington we viewed as being gay. But I couldn't objectively state that in 1994 or 5. So we just tried to write him consistently so that if down the road, who would know, but down the road being 2023,
right?
That when it was objectively stated, finally, people wouldn't be going, that makes no sense. They'd be going, oh yeah, of course,
right.
Or I knew it, kind of thing. But for the most part, those themes, we were very conscious of it. One of the things that Frank and I and Michael Reeves and our other story editors, which include Carrie Bates, who I mentioned earlier, Gary Sperling, and Bryn Chandler Reeves, one of the things that all of us as a group decided very early on is that we were going to make the kind of show we wanted to see. We would write it on layers so that there was stuff there for real little kids. There's going to be big monsters, lots of explosions, action, humor, but there would also be stuff there for older teens and tweens and stuff there for guys in their 30s like us, you know. And we would, our feeling was, and this has been one of the things that's, I think, defined my work throughout my so-called career, is I've got to be passionate about what I'm doing. If I'm not passionate about what I'm doing, how can I expect any viewer to be passionate? And what that means is that sometimes if I'm passionate about something, there are going to be some viewers who are not going to like it. And that's fine. I can live with that. You know, what I can't live with is the notion is that I'm going to try and predict what viewers want. And I won't be passionate about it, but I'll try and give them what they want. And to me, that's a great path to failure. Certainly creative failure, and 9 times out of 10, I would say even commercial failure. If all you're doing is Frankensteining together what you think the audience might want, and you've got no passion for it, then no passion is going to come out in the product. And if no passion comes out in the product, then there's almost no way that the audience is going to get passionate about it. So when you talk about, hey, what are the themes that interest us on a show like Gargoyles, even back in 1994, 1995, 6, you're talking about themes of, you know, don't judge a book by its cover, themes of, you know, what is the point of vengeance, you know, as opposed to mercy? Is redemption possible for us as a species? You know, these are all things that we would talk about in our story. And you know, some of what wound up in the show, I'm sure, was serendipitous, but most of it was quite intentional. And most of what we wrote with intent. And a lot of it, I think, was secretly subversive. At least I like to think it was. And certainly the politics of the show, everything being relative, was, you know, liberal for the 90s. And looking back on it was, you know, flat out progressive in hindsight. We didn't use the term progressive in 1994, but there's no doubt looking back on it, that's what it was. And I'm proud of that. You know, this was something that mattered to us, and you know, we made some conscious choices along those lines. If we were going to do a show about a species trying to find its way among the human race, then one of the things that we did was make Elisa Maza, who's the human cop, we made her A, female, and B, a woman of color. C, we made her her mother African American and her father Native American, with the idea, and this is still a story I haven't gotten around to telling yet, though I hope to someday, because it's a flashback story to the parents of a character as opposed to one of our leads.
Right.
But, you know, having a biracial family in what would have been the 70s and 80s,
Right.
that was a big deal back then, but
For
also
sure.
helps us understand why Elisa is open to
To an
accepting an
interspecies
entire other
relationship.
species, is because some of the things she faced as a child, even. And this is backstory that I'm telling you, this was in our heads.
Wow.
This was stuff we talked about in the 90s when we were making this show. All this stuff mattered to us. And so there was a lot of intention to what we did, I guess is the short version of the 30-minute answer.
No, so along those lines, because I'm going to ask this question that actually comes from the audience before I fast forward us a bit. But one of our moderators in our Facebook group, Seth, says, I'd love to know more about the concept of the removed episode Revolving Gun Safety. How was it putting such a mature theme into a kid's show? Many of us fans remember seeing it and it being fairly impactful.
That was an episode that we started talking about, and I remember having a moment going, I don't know if they're going to let us do this, but they won't let us do it if we don't try to do it. In other words, they're not going to spontaneously come to us and go, do this,
Right.
So we had to give it a shot. And then I was quite surprised to find that we got nothing but cooperation all the way up the line. There were questions that were asked, and I think they were legitimate questions. When the animation first came back, so for those members of your audience who don't know, what happens is that the character Broadway, one of the gargoyles, has seen this movie where there's a gunfight in the movie. And when he gets to Elisa's apartment, he sees she's a cop and she lives alone. And so when she gets home at night, she hangs her holster with her gun on it just up on a coat rack.
Right.
Which is not a secure way to keep your gun, but there were no children in the household and that sort of thing. So she didn't really think about it back then. Although in later episodes, you see her lock her gun up every time. But she just leaves it out. And Broadway picks it up and he's playing with it like it's a toy. And then he accidentally pulls the trigger. And Elisa is shot. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes on in the episode, but Elisa nearly dies from an accidental gunshot. And we were very careful with this episode. I mean, one thing that happened when the animation first came back, there was a huge pool of blood beneath Elisa, which we changed for two reasons. One is because it was so big, pool of blood, that it looked like she had completely bled out. And in the end, we were going to have her survive. Right. So one reason we had that animation redone was that pragmatic reason, right? But the other reason is the pool of blood was so large, it became a distraction. It was like, oh, we just wanted a chance to do gore. Well, that wasn't the case at all. It wasn't about gore.
Right.
So we had the animation redone so that it was way more subtle. And that episode went out. It got phenomenal attention from everything from TV Guide. There was a woman who wrote a book. Her name was Madeline Levine, called Viewing Violence, which was largely critical of television and all the violence that kids were exposed to, and yet praised that episode because of how responsible it was. This was not per se, it wasn't about gun control. It wasn't about the Second Amendment. This was an episode about gun safety.
Right.
And we felt it was an important episode that kids should know that kids should know not to play with guns. They are not toys. B, parents should know that they should lock their guns up.
Right.
And years later, that episode became controversial. But when it came out, it wasn't controversial at all. Right. I think maybe we got one negative letter about it, like, how can you put this on television, kind of thing. But for the most part, people got it, and it became something that parents could watch with their kids and talk about it, a conversation starter. And that's sort of where that episode came from, is just like, we were doing 3 episodes. We had a trio of young gargoyles, teenagers, basically, Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway. And we did a trio of episodes, one for each of them. And when we came to the Broadway episode, which was the third of those 3, that became the story that we told for that episode.
Yeah, it's crazy just to think the things that were relevant, socially then are still now in a lot of ways. And, maybe I just haven't been around the block enough times, right? There's some things that I just assume we wouldn't still have to be talking about, right? But it also,
all of them.
Say it again.
We have to talk about all of them.
Right.
None of those issues are settled at all.
Right. It's crazy.
It's sad in a way.
It is. It definitely is. But yeah, so it's interesting just the way conversation evolves and how a lot of it goes in cycles. And so, man, we're almost an hour in. We haven't talked about half of the things. But there is one question from the audience that I wanted to ask you before we move on. And it comes from another one of our moderators. It says, Greg, one of the things I loved about first Gargoyles, but then Young Justice was the way you guys would tell a complete story in one, sometimes more for multi-part episodes that would include plot points that would grow and get built upon in later episodes. It says, can you talk a little about the trust you need to have in your audience to attempt a story structure in shows initially aimed at kids in the pre-streaming days?
So a lot of that came from my background in comics. In other words, that was a technique I would use in Captain Atom. Books coming out once a month,
right?
Not even once a week, like a TV series, once a month. And you'd lay pipe, you'd plant a seed for something that wasn't going to bear fruit for 5 or 6 issues or something like that. So I wasn't shy about doing that kind of thing. And I had tremendous faith in our audience, all of which was borne out, not like, oh, I had tremendous faith in my audience and man, I was wrong. No, in fact, I was right.
Yeah.
And we could plant seeds. And it also allowed, there was a rule, the quote unquote conventional wisdom in those days was that comedy repeats because people will laugh again and again and again at the same things.
Right.
But a drama, an adventure show, it doesn't repeat because if they know how it turns out, why would they watch it a second time? Well, one of the things that we learned is that if we do this sort of thing, people will actually watch these episodes again because they'll watch it a second time and go, oh my God, they planted a seed for that. Way back. I mean, we did something in season 4 of Young Justice with a school bus that we had been planting seeds for 10 years earlier back in season 1. And so they go back and they watch season 1 and they're like, oh my God, this thing with the school bus, they started doing 4 seasons ago, or, I guess 3 seasons ago, whatever. Right. And we did that on Gargoyles, that, we had an episode and they worked in both directions. Like at one point, Michael Reeves, I can't remember if this was an episode he wrote himself or story edited, but had a line in there about David Xanatos having a meeting with an emir, and David goes, tell him to wait. And for us, when in that episode, it was just like that showed how important David Xanatos was, that he could even make an emir wait, right? But I got sort of fascinated with who is this emir? So down the road, we did an episode with the emir. Tony Shalhoub played the emir, and it was about the emir's son had died in a car accident, and so in the middle, in between the initial throwaway mention of the Emir and the actual episode with the Emir, we did a second mention of the Emir to plant a seed for what was coming. But, if you don't know the inside story about it, you'd go back and watch that first episode and like, oh my God, they did that. They mentioned the Emir 30 episodes earlier or something like that, so sometimes we discover things along the way. We're certainly open to that. But other times we had plans in mind. And so we would know what was coming and we'd start planting seeds for that stuff. So that by the time, the actual thing comes to the fore, again, it just feels very organic. And I was never worried about our audience keeping up. For one reason is when we did the actual episode with the Emir, we introduced the Emir. You didn't have to have seen those 2 episodes.
Right.
But if you did, it's a little bit, more fun for you. But you didn't have to. So, if you missed them, you missed them. But, and what we always said, particularly back then, again, pre-streaming, is we could never be 100% sure where an audience was joining us.
Right.
If you're streaming a show nowadays, why wouldn't you start with episode 1? I mean, that'd just be weird.
Right.
Oh, I've got Netflix has 20 episodes of this on. I think I'll start with episode 4. Why would you do that?
Right.
But when it was television, well, you just start where you happen to start.
Right.
And then, you hope to catch those older episodes and reruns eventually. But we couldn't be sure that everyone was starting at the beginning. So any episode had to be cohesive enough that it lived and died on its own. But what we would hope it would be is intriguing enough that even if they enjoyed that story, they go like, I want to watch more of this. And intriguing enough that they're like, I want to see where it started. I'm going to buy the videotapes back then. I'm going to buy the VHS tapes. Or I'm going to wait till they start showing the reruns and I'm going to, watch them that way.
Right.
We wanted people wherever they started to continue forward, but also want to look back at what they'd missed. And now, again, that's easier. You mentioned earlier before we got on the air, you started with Young Justice when it came on the DC Universe streaming service.
Yes.
And you obviously, you started with episode 1. You watch the first season, you watch the second season, and then when the third season started dropping, you watched 2, which, by the way, I love. And I always want my audience to watch in order because the show is better that way. Gargoyles was very much not a serialized show. It was episodic, but it was sequential.
Gotcha.
So you didn't have to watch it in order, but you got way more out of it if you did.
Right.
Young Justice, in contrast, is mostly episodic and sequential, but we have a lot more serialized elements in YJ, particularly once you get to seasons 3 and 4, than we ever had in Gargoyles.
Yeah.
And then now I'm doing these Gargoyles comics, and those are very serialized. I mean, coming out once a month, and they're very serialized, and they're canon with the original television series, the first 2 seasons. And it's a great joy to me to be able to work with these characters again, but I'm also paying off things that I planted seeds for 30 years ago.
Right.
That, we didn't get enough episodes to see that fruit, appear on the vine. Well, some of it's appearing on the vine, as we speak.
Yeah, no. And thank you for the perfect segue into the present. Right. So, Gargoyles have been coming out in comics for about a year now, or just over. And of course you've returned, to it, which is just, it just shows your love for this work. Right.
Mhm.
I started picking them. I was very excited when Dynamite got the Disney license, mostly because they were bringing back Darkwing Duck, which of all those Disney afternoon shows was my favorite. Um, but then I was like, oh snap, I remember Gargoyles, and so I subscribed to everything. And so I was reading. I think I got to issue 3, and I'm going through, and I'm like, I get it, but it just feels like I'm missing something, right? Like we open and, things are different from what I remember from when I was 4, right? And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to be better served watching the show first. I ended up watching all of season 1 and maybe about half of season 2. I don't remember how far I got to the Halloween episode where fun Easter egg. Elisa, excuse me, is dressed as Belle because they're Beauty and the Beast.
Right.
But anyway, I got far enough to where when I opened the comic again in preparation for our conversation, it's like, oh, okay, now this all feels familiar and fresh. And then I was able to go through, read the whole 11 issues, and like, I'm just like amazed. I think the series really does pick up probably around issue
With
4.
issue 4. No,
Yeah.
I think so too, by the way. I'm, I think that the first 3 issues, I mean, I like that story, but it's, I hadn't, I was still writing like a TV writer, not like
Mm,
a comic book writer.
mm,
So issue 1 is act 1, issue 2 is act 2, issue
mm.
3 is act 3. Those 3 issues could have been an episode of the TV series,
Yes.
but they weren't written like a comic book. And so what happens, uh, beginning with issue 4, I really feel this way,
Mm,
is that I was like, okay, I got to start thinking like a comic book writer again.
mm,
And I think issue 4 really kicks it into gear. I think the first 3 issues are good,
mm.
but I think it really becomes a comic book with issue 4.
Yeah. And then by the
And I
time
mean
we
that in a
get,
good way.
no, it's really good. I mean, by the time we get to the what'll be the second volume in trades, it's on all cylinders. With the trial of Goliath and all of that, like that, that's just it's great. So you've
Thank you.
returned to no problem. So you've returned to Gargoyles, after some 30 years. Now you did another Gargoyle series back in '06. What is it about? Well, I guess I'm sure I know the answer, but what is it about Gargoyles that keeps you coming back?
It's literally the characters. I mean, I just have tremendous affection for all these characters,
Mm,
and I have never stopped working on this series.
mm,
I have uh, a dozen composition books like this,
wow.
um, with ideas
Mm,
for gargoyles. I have a timeline that's, I don't know, like, um, just a sec. Um, I have a timeline for the series. My computer. Anytime I want something, this is not the first time this has happened.
right.
It like refuses to cooperate. Um, yeah, I have no idea, but it's hundreds of pages long.
Wow.
And it just will not open right now. There it
Mm,
goes, finally. And um, one thing I will say is that one of the major impetuses of my continued interest,
mm,
yeah, this timeline is 394 pages long
wow.
and always growing, um, is the fans themselves. So
Mm,
Gargoyles has really phenomenally great fans.
yeah.
Um, they are smart, they're passionate, um, they are incredibly creative. I know many Gargoyles fans who've gone on, who were kids when the show came out, or teenagers, or in their early 20s, who've gone on to become pros in their own right.
Hmm.
And their interest in it kept my interest high. And so I've been working nonstop to continue Gargoyles in one way or another since I left the series in '96.
Hmm.
So we had, Marvel did some Gargoyles comics while we were making the series, and I was supposed to take over the writing of the Marvel book, but then it got canceled. So
Hmm.
I'd written one issue that never saw print. And
Gotcha.
then, as you said, in 2006 or seven, something like that,
Hmm.
a company called SLG got the license, and I wrote 12 issues of Gargoyles and 6 issues of a spin-off comic called Gargoyles Bad Guys.
Hmm.
All of those, we actually have a Kickstarter beginning this Thursday. So I don't know when. So Thursday, January 11th, a Kickstarter, Dynamite has a Kickstarter beginning that collects the 3 volumes of
Hmm.
previous Gargoyles comics. The volume 1 is the Marvel stuff,
Okay.
which includes artists like Amanda Connor, writers like Marty Pasco, Jimmy Palmiotti,
Hmm.
just some incredibly talented people. Then volume 2 is the 12 issues of Gargoyles that I wrote for SLG. And volume 3 is the 6 issues of Bad Guys that I wrote for SLG. And all of those comics have been out of print for decades, and incredibly difficult to get, go for thousands of dollars on eBay. So one thing I really do want to promote is on Thursday, January 11th, check out the Dynamite Kickstarter for Gargoyles, because that's a great way to get these volumes going.
And it's going to be a
But
3 hardcover set, or they're all collected into one?
you can get no, it's 3 volumes,
Okay.
but you can get them as trade paperbacks, or you can get them as hardcovers. There are 3 different versions of each book.
Hmm.
And they go all the way up to a very expensive version, but there's also some versions that are, priced normally for a trade and that kind of thing, that are pretty inexpensive.
Okay.
And there are other perks and stuff as rewards, lithographs and various things. Like, I can't even go into all of it now, but
Hmm.
check it out. That's where I would go to Kickstarter, look up Gargoyles. It's uh, it's a pretty cool project, and that's the old stuff. In terms of
Hmm.
the new stuff, yeah, we're on issue 11 out of 12 issues of the main Gargoyles arc, which is called Here in Manhattan.
Hmm.
And then we are on issue 5 out of 6 of the Gargoyles Dark Ages spinoff. And then as those two come to a stop, we are starting up a Gargoyles miniseries called Gargoyles Quest, which is a 5-issue miniseries. And then that will be followed by another Gargoyles series. We're doing, Dynamite is all in on Gargoyles, and Disney's very supportive, and it's all been a blast for me. And I think the fans have responded really, really well to these books.
So you wrote in the introduction to the hardcover, for Here in Manhattan Volume 1, that issue 1 was the biggest debut issue in Dynamite's history.
That's what
That's
Dynamite tells me, is that God knows they had so many covers, something like 82 different covers, but which I'm sure is a big part of it. And then, a big part of it is George Camedes's art, which is
yeah.
great. And the artists, the many, many cover artists we had, including Amanda Connor, who worked on Gargoyles way back when at
Mm.
Marvel, and David Nakayama and Jay Lee, and all sorts of fantastic artists. I like to think that my writing helped too. But the creator of the show coming back to write new stories, new canon stories,
Mhm.
is part of the selling point. But yes, Dynamite tells me that issue one was Dynamite's best-selling issue ever.
That's amazing.
Um, yeah, I was pretty pleased about that. And the book is still selling well. I'm sure it's not at issue one numbers,
Mm.
obviously, but the book is still selling really well, and we're still going. We've done those 18 issues. We also did a one-shot Gargoyles Halloween special.
Yes.
So if you want to see what Elisa dressed up for Halloween in 1997, you can do that, because our series is set back in 97. I decided not to jump to the present. The original series ran from 94 to 96.
Mhm.
So this comic, and then the SLG comics were set um, uh, between 96 and 97. And now the current comics are set in 97, except for Dark Ages, which
Mhm.
is a prequel set
Right.
in, um, oh, I know this, but I'm blanking out at the moment, but it's uh, in the obviously in the Middle Ages, in the Dark
Right.
Ages. So it's set 1,000+ years ago. 971, that's it. In the
Gotcha.
year 971 AD.
Wow. So, and you just wanted to continue the story from there. Why not jump it into the future?
Oh, I wanted to, because I had so many stories to tell. I
Hmm.
did, I'll get to if they keep letting me write Gargoyles, I'll keep writing it. So we'll get to, you know, 98 eventually, and then 99, and then 2000, and we'll just keep going. But the odds are we're not going to catch up anytime soon. Um, but I'm game to just keep going, and for as long as they'll let me.
Okay. Now, while we're on the subject of gargoyles, I was checking your IMDb the other day, and I don't know if it's even up here anymore, but there's some rumor out there there's gargoyles coming back to the screen. Could you speak to that at all?
Uh, I mean, they announced Atomic Monster has made a deal with Disney to do a live action Gargoyles television series.
Mm,
I'm not at liberty to talk about it at all.
gotcha.
So that's all I can really say at this stage.
Okay. Okay. So, man, no, like the legacy of gargoyles has certainly been enduring. It's funny, like now that I've revisited the series, like it's just made me more of a fan. I had been walking past this NECA Goliath, and well, there's a whole gargoyles line um in like every Target ever. I passed by an armored Xanatos yesterday. Wow, yeah, yeah. No, those NECA. Let me spotlight you real quick. But yeah, no, those NECA gargoyles action figures are just amazing. I walked by an armored Xanatos yesterday. There's Angela and Demo, like everybody, and they
There's
are
14 NECA figures out so far, and they're making more.
wow. That is awesome.
NECA's doing a fantastic job.
They
Um,
they
I've got no input on that at all, but
mm,
I am all for it. You know, I've got NECA very kindly sent me one of each,
mm,
except for Goliath, because I already had Goliath. Um, but it's thrilling to me to see this. There are plushies out. There's
mm,
new version of the old Sega video game out.
yes.
Um, there, uh, it seems like the sort of nostalgia wave of the '90s is finally sort of catching up to us.
Mm.
Um, and I'm thrilled. Honestly, I think it's great. I don't own gargoyles. I don't when I do get to work on it, it's by the grace of Disney,
Mhm.
uh, and that's fine. It's their property. I created it, and I was one of two showrunners on it, but they own it.
Mhm.
Um, but when I am allowed to be involved in it, it's just tremendous fun for me.
Man, it's it's got to be awesome to conceive of something and just watch it just grow for all these years. Man, that's amazing. So Gargoyles, we've got a lot of Gargoyles comics out. Like I said, there's the volume 1 here in Manhattan. I think the hardcover just came out last week, unless the solicits didn't get updated. You can get it in trade paperback form. That's the first 6 issues of the 2023 series. Gargoyles Dark Ages is still coming out in single issues right now. Gargoyles Quest #1 is out February 7th, 2024. And there's a lot more where that came from. There's a Kickstarter starting on Thursday, January 11th. So for those of you who are like me and missed out on all the original Gargoyles comics, you got a chance to own those as well. And before I let you go, you've got all that coming, and that's amazing. But you're also returning to another animated property that you produced. And in March, we've got a series from Marvel coming, Spectacular Spider-Man, which will be the first time in an ongoing comic that Peter and Miles are teamed up. What can you tell us about it?
Uh, yeah, the Spectacular Spider-Men, plural. It is an absolute kick to write. Um, I what I will say is that the art is by Humberto Ramos,
Mhm.
and is so gorgeous that I feel like I could write a shopping list and it would still be worth buying. I like to think my writing's a little better than a shopping list, but the stuff that I'm seeing from Umberto, and he is currently penciling issue 3. Coloring is being done on issue 2. Um, Edgar Delgado's doing the coloring, and it's gorgeous also. Um, so what I will say is that visually, this book is just stunning.
Mhm.
I am very, by the way, also thrilled with the work that George Camadeus did on Gargoyles, and which um, Drew did on Dark Ages. But uh, getting Umberto back on Spider-Man is just a tremendous treat.
Yeah.
I'm having great fun writing Peter and Miles together. It's an interesting dynamic because Miles has been used to Peter as sort of a mentor figure,
Mhm.
and is really trying to step up and prove that he is mature uh, and can be Peter's friend instead of his protege. And from Peter's point of view, he already views Miles as his friend. And so Peter is actually enjoying hanging out with a 16-year-old and is letting his own inner 16-year-old sort of hang out.
Mhm.
And so you have this sort of odd role reversal
Mhm.
where Miles is the one acting responsible and mature, and Peter's the one who's acting like a goofball. And yet it feels very right to me that's become their dynamic as they're evolving out of protege mentor relationship and
Mhm.
into just, hey, we're just good friends now.
Yeah.
And the basic premise of the book, I don't think this is a much of a spoiler, is that Peter just suggests to Miles, hey, let's get together every Wednesday.
Mhm.
Let's spend an hour. Let's get coffee every Wednesday. And Miles is like, I mean, like, you know, how are we going to get this coffee when we're in our costumes? And Peter's like, no, no, no. This isn't Spider-Man. This isn't a team up.
Mhm.
This is Peter and Miles. These are two friends. We'll pick a coffee shop. We'll go there every Wednesday. And
Mhm.
they pick the coffee bean on the campus of Empire State University. That's Peter's alma mater, and it's
Mm-hmm.
also a school that Miles is interested in applying to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, we'll go to this coffee shop. Peter works really hard to become a regular there. He like wants them to, it's like the coffee shop where everybody knows your name. He wants them to shout his name out when he walks in the door. He wants his order ready, kind of thing. Miles is like, Peter's like giving the order, and it's complicated. And so week in, week out, he gives the same order until finally the barista like knows his order by
Mm-hmm.
heart, right? Miles is like, I use the app like a normal person. What is wrong with you? And we begin to build, because they each have their own books, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're building sort of a little supporting cast at this coffee bean. And the idea is that no team ups. We're not going to do any Spider-Man stuff. This is just two friends, civilian clothes, hanging out, having a coffee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a comic book, so that lasts for about half an issue before the
Right.
shit hits the fan. But that's the idea, is that we're just going to be friends, and we're going to wind up with a group of friends in this coffee shop. And so we have the baristas are characters, the other customers are characters, and what goes on among these people, this is what this series is about. And so it's a very, on one level, sort of human. This isn't the big, Galactus isn't coming down in this series.
Right.
This is much more ground level, which isn't to say it doesn't get superhero-y and
Mm-hmm.
science fiction-y and stuff like that. There's all sorts of aspects to it, but I think it's a lot of fun, and I definitely hope people pick it up.
I'm
And
excited
the
about it.
first issue comes out in March, and like I
Yes.
said, beyond anything I'm writing, it is incredibly gorgeous looking.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's one I can't wait to see. There's been so much talk over the years of like, where does Miles fit, especially now they've got him in the 616, and the sort of team up mentor mentee, like it just makes sense. And I think you're right, it does allow Peter to kind of let his hair down, be a kid again, which is something that, the fandom has been asking for. Why does Peter have to be going through such dark times all the time? So I think this is going to hit a spot that a lot of people have been waiting for a long time. And yeah, Humberto Ramos art will never hurt a Spider-Man book.
exactly.
Man.
Like when the editor Nick Lowe called me up and he said, "Yeah, I'm interested in having you work on this," and I was like, and Umberto is going to be drawing it, and I was like, I can't say yes to this fast enough. I don't know. It's like I'm trying to get a word in edgewise. He's like trying to talk me into it. I'm like, you had me at Spider-Man.
Right.
You had me at Umberto. You had me at Miles and Pete. I'm like, you're trying to convince me. I'm just trying to say yes to you, Nick.
Right.
And you're not giving me the chance. So it's just been a ball. It really has. I mean, obviously, I produced, and this isn't connected to that. I want to make that clear. This isn't a continuation of the TV show, The Spectacular Spider-Man. This is set in the main Marvel universe, and
Right.
but I'm not. I suggested the title, The Spectacular Spider-Man. I said having me on that title, I think is going to sell more comics.
Right.
But I love Spider-Man. I mean, I've loved him since I was a kid. We had a blast doing those 26 episodes of Spectacular for Sony and Marvel and Kids WB, and then ultimately for Disney XD. And I'm very proud of those episodes. And it is tremendous fun for me to be doing this book with both Peter and Miles. Obviously, I go way, way back with Peter. Not as far back with Miles because Miles didn't exist that far back, but
Right.
but I go back pretty far with Miles too, and it is a kick to write them both together and to see how they interact. again, as their relationship very consciously, they are trying, not just me, although that's true too, but Peter and Miles themselves in this book are trying to evolve their relationship beyond the mentor protege to them just being equals and friends. And it's a conscious thing for even the characters, let alone the writer.
Right. Man, well, no, I'm excited to read it. That issue 1 of Spectacular Spider-Man drops March 6th, 2024. So you can pre-order that with your local comic shop. In the meantime, you can get caught up on all things Gargoyles at dynamite.com/Disney. Before we wrap, I do want to thank Nick Barucci and the team at Dynamite for facilitating this conversation and for bringing Greg Weisman back to the Gargoyles. This has been awesome. And thank you, Greg.
Can I make one more plug?
Sure.
So the 30th anniversary of Gargoyles is this year, 2024. And over the 4th of July weekend in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we are having, they have a convention there called Convergence. You can find it at convergence-con.org on the internet. And we are at Convergence. We are celebrating the 30th anniversary of Gargoyles. I'll be there. Tom Adcox, the voice of Lexington, will be there. Keith David, the voice of Goliath, will be there. Zara Fuzzle, the voice of Sherry, will be there. And maybe more. Those are the ones I already know are locked in.
Wow.
And I know that a lot of old fans are that I'm still friends with are planning to come. And I would just urge, if you're a fan of Gargoyles, I mean, Convergence is its own convention, and there's all sorts of pop culture stuff that'll be there to love. I love Convergence. It's a great con. But specifically, if you're a Gargoyles fan, this is a convention you're going to want to attend. Again, it's over the 4th of July weekend this year in Minneapolis. And so I just want to give a little plug for Convergence this year, because we are doing a big Gargoyles 30th anniversary celebration there.
Wow. Well, that's going to be huge. That guest list alone, that's crazy. Man, that's going to be a good time. I don't know if I'll be able to swing it, but that's going to be a good time. So definitely get your tickets.
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome, man. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time. You don't know how much this conversation has enriched me, and it's just been great. So I really appreciate it, and just all of your work over the years. My childhood, my adulthood is not the same without your contributions. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I really do.
Oh, yes, no problem at all. Well, look, guys, we had a great time with Greg. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in another video real soon. Till then, stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. You should probably make it Gargoyles.